Welcome to Lessons I Learned in Law, the weekly podcast by Heriot Brown in-house legal recruitment. I'm Scott Brown and I'm a recovering lawyer and founder of Heriot Brown. And each week I'll be bringing you conversations with leading legal minds who've found fulfilling paths in their careers. We dive into their unique stories and the lessons that they've learned, discovering how each guest defines success in their own way. Whether it's navigating big risks or sharing pivotal moments and career successes and how they got to the place they are in their career. Our guests offer insights and experiences that you won't really find elsewhere. So open conversations, so tune in each week for fresh perspectives and real chats that highlight the diverse paths to a rewarding career in law. Hi, welcome back to another episode of Lessons I Learned in Law. This week, I'm joined by Aki Hussein, who is Chief Legal Officer, Compliance Officer, and co-founder of TerraPay, which is a global leader in enabling cross-border payments. Now, Aki's life, his career spans from boarding school in Switzerland to the bustling streets of Nairobi, where he followed his wife's career with UNICEF, to the New York board and London boardrooms now as leader, and it harnesses or touches upon entrepreneurship, law, and where those two meet. We dive into a load of things, but what really stood out and was interesting to me and could really see some similarities between my own career was what drove him from being a lawyer in a successful career in law and moving into a position of entrepreneurship and taking that dive into setting up TerraPay with his co-founders. He's really harnessed what he learned from his career in-house in a regulated environment in telco and applied it in an entrepreneurial way. So it's really cool. We also talk around fruit flies and what you can learn about yourself from your average fruit fly. So easier said than done. So trust me, you don't want to miss that. These lessons, they're full of insights for lawyers, anyone that's got an itch that they'd like to scratch or thinking about taking a leap of faith in their career. So you don't want to miss out. Join me, and without further ado. So hi Aki, thanks for joining me, and welcome to Lessons I Learned in Law.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Really nice to sit down and speak with you. Thanks for making the time, because I know it's coming up we were just chatting before recording, coming up for Thanksgiving in your part of the world. So what does it mean to you, Thanksgiving? What's the how does it work? I've never experienced it locally. And
it's for me, all the best bits of a good big holiday. There's a lot of time with family, a lot of food, a lot of friends, a lot of downtime, talking, maybe a fire pit or two. That's what I love. It's really one of my favorite holidays. So
yeah, I want to experience it at some point. I had we were around at friends who had lived in the US, and they had a sort of celebration on Sunday. But yeah, I would like to see it firsthand in the US and everything that goes with it. So yeah, cool. So I've given an introduction as best as I could, but it's always useful to start and hear it from the horse's mouth. So it'd be great if you could give our listeners a quick overview of your current role, business, and what position you should fill there.
Okay, thanks. So I'm Chief Legal Officer and Compliance Officer for a company called TerraPay, TerraPay. I'm also a co-founder of that business. And what TerraPay does is enable cross-border payments in all ways and shapes and forms, effectively skewing towards underbanked or unbanked populations. We're B2B, digital first, mobile wallet biased. And a lot of that comes from where we, as the founders, as four of us, came from, respectively and collectively, which is skews heavily to the telecom industry, financial services industry, and emerging market experience. Yeah, what we do is, and as I said, I'm both the lawyer or the owner of the function and also the co-founder, which is relatively not a Venn diagram that you see very often, and that gives you a very strong data signal of how we see the world. The regulatory aspect to us is not something to be welded on down the road. It's very much baked into the recipe.
Right. Cool. So just dealing sort of front on with the regulators and building relationships at the ground level.
Exactly right. I mean, back in 2015, 16, we were having a debate on whether or not to go just a pure technology player route, right? Which would be much lighter on the regulatory infrastructure and much faster from a go-to-market perspective. But we chose at that point to go the other road, which is to get our own licenses and our own direct connectivity as much as possible. Well, it's a moat. All right. It's hard to get these licenses. It's hard to maintain them. And secondly, and relatedly, it drives a lot of optionality. The money flows can be orchestrated in many more creative ways, and you can serve many more problem statements if you have it within your own latitude to affect those. And that's generally a regulatory thing, not a technology thing. I could send anyone a text message right now in the world, more or less, and it'll land in some way, shape, or form. But if I attach a tokenized value to it, now I need to worry about, well, who's the recipient? Is the person on a sanctioned list? Is it, are they a PEP? Is there money laundering involved? You see what I mean? Really, that once you have that nuance, the technology aspect sort of is necessary, but far from sufficient. So that's something that I'm...
This is a good way of putting it. I'd never heard the analogy with the SMS or a message. That's cool, understandable. And so set up in 2015, you were there. You were one of the co-founders you mentioned. It was in 2015 the business was set up?
Yeah, 2015 we started really rolling up sleeves and getting down to it. 24-month go-to-market, which is something, this is move fast and break things. There's a lot of sobriety involved in terms of judgment and decision-making when it comes to selling financial services for both reasons, supply and demand. Like, one is you're touching real people's money, and our average ticket size at that point was relatively low because it was mobile wallets. It was a lot of migrant remittances. So somewhat crudely, you can divide the world into north and south, like send and receive. Obviously, there's many, many more nuances, but that's beyond the scope of this. A lot of people were leaving their countries, going to another country and sending wages home in a prototypical use case. And so the ticket sizes remained, I hesitate to use the word small because it's disrespectful, because of the work that goes into it and also the asymmetrical impact that these sorts of transfers have, both at the micro, which is to say the household level, but if you aggregate it out at the macro economy, GDP level, that it's massive significance. And that was something I'm also really proud of, like the aspect of social utility, financial inclusion, the impact on gender, because a dollar landed into the hands of a woman is generally, and this is statistically, not an opinion, it's empirically borne out, it's worth 6 or 7 of the value if you landed into a patriarchal household.
Right.
And so the impact on society is, ultimately those decisions are taken by the household. So we have healthy, thank goodness we don't. But I'm just laying it out for you that it does move the needle. So.
Yeah. Awesome. And you're based in the US, based in
Correct. Yeah. I'm based in New York. I spend a lot of time traveling. We are a highly distributed team. We are headquartered in the UK in London, but we have offices in many places in the world. Like I said, we try to get licenses wherever we go. Yeah. And we have sort of a network of key licenses and licensed entities with the full accoutrements that a licensed entity demands, which is to say, obviously, an entity, an office, a board of directors, et cetera, et cetera. So we have that sort of arrangement, and that governance aspect is critical to my role as well, obviously. So we have an office in London, in Singapore, in Bangalore, Nairobi, Dar es Salaam, Johannesburg, just to give you a flavor of the sort of extent of it.
I'm having to transfer UK sterling to Europe to hopefully put a house over my family's head and for a deposit.
Nice.
Congrats. How do I do that? How do I go about? What's the most efficient way?
Well, for such a large amount, I'm presuming it's a large amount, significant both for you and generally in the objective sense. I would just use a banking. I would just use straight, like, for such a large amount, and you just want to be able to track it, and heaven forbid. But that's, again, that is sort of the inherent, that's a nice question because it cracks open all the false bluster I'm giving you about the risk-taking entrepreneur and like, damn the torpedoes, like it's not that. I'm still a lawyer. You can't take the tiger out of the jungle or whatever, but so that's how I'd play it. If it's a large amount and it relates to, it's not sort of Vegas money or something. It's like, real money for real things. There are people kind of looking to you to sort of, get you in the right school district or whatever you're trying to accomplish. I would just keep it super straightforward. For smaller amounts or more regular amounts, it's also a one-off amount, right? I mean, presumably you're not doing this every quarter.
No.
That's what I'm saying. And you're sort of insensitive to the cost of it. You're sort of more optimizing for safety and surety and trackability and negotiate the effects, obviously, because those are one-offs. If it's such a large amount, then it's worth shopping that around. So I think that is actually where the needle would get moved more than how to transmit the monies. I think it'd be more interesting to have a conversation around look at sizable amount, and I am looking to find a new home in a bank here. I've left my country and I'm moving here, and you can have that conversation, and that can drive FX values. Maybe your answer.
It was more on the FX piece. It was more on the FX piece and getting not just go with the first thing, whether it was a bank transfer and getting hidden fees.
No. That's worth it. I would be a chef on the FX aspect, but a cook on the how to transmit it aspect. You just get it over the line.
Nice. I like that. Yeah. Nice one. Well, that gives us a good overview and good overview. So we'll jump into your first lesson. If you could share that, please.
Sure. I mean, I think my first lesson, I would call it focus on the fruit flies. And what I mean by that is for a long time, I just saw things maybe I lack nuance or something, but I saw things as big words that seemed unobtainable to me, like passion, career, legacy, give back. All these words were they had no resonance with me. I had no idea what it meant, or even if I'd ever be able to sort of grasp, these misty concepts. And I think it's wrong-headed to focus on those big words. Those big words are valid, but they arrive at the end of a thought cycle, or maybe 1,000 thought cycles. They're not something that can be grasped in the first instance. And nobody, or I was never taught that. I never read it. I never saw it. And I think it's just intuitive. So what I mean by that is when in the study of genetics, you don't study human genetics just because our lifespans are so long and there's so many variables. This person smokes, this person doesn't, this person came from a broken household, this person, so many vectors that you can look at in a scientific fashion. So instead they look at fruit flies because they're quick, they're predictable, they're none of them have PTSD. There's a lot of, you can just do thought cycles really quickly and get kind of high fidelity results. I don't know how the genetics of a fruit fly apply to us. I couldn't speak to them. But I don't need to, thankfully. What I'm saying is that these small things can teach you a lot very quickly if you listen to them. And there's a reason why people study fruit flies. It's cheap and free also. But yeah, that's what I would say. There's a lot of things that are happening at a fractal level. And when you're busy and you're ambitious and you're trying to grow things, that main feature in your field of apprehension. And I would encourage you to think about it. The patterns are there. You may not be able to recognize them. And when I say you, I obviously mean me. But they're there for you to study, for you to learn yourself.
Do you mean follow what other people, or look at what other people are doing and fly with a fruit fly analogy?
No. Also, I think jealousy is a good. I mean, I'm using that word, not you. I think jealousy is a very strong indicator. Who are you jealous of and why? And that's a very strong tell. That will reveal a lot about you. But that's a good fruit fly experiment because you don't need to tell anyone other than if you have a journal or whatever. But I'm jealous of, no, most of it's laughable. When you write it, nobody's jealous of the Queen of England because she's got a lot of money. That it's just not a peer-to-peer, I'm not jealous of her. It's not that kind of thing. But I am jealous of other people and I'm insecure about a lot of other things. But if I catalog them, thereby conducting a fruit fly experiment, I've got a very good set, a low stakes, no stakes experiment. Why am I jealous of this person? What does they have that I don't have? And how wrong-headed it is to just cherry pick one data point when what you need to do is a wholesale swap. If you're actually, you know what I mean? And no one's willing to do that almost. When you couch it in those terms, you're like, no, I don't want to do that. So that's what I would say. But I think it's also in your very own interactions, something simple, do you eat breakfast every day? Does it make you feel bloated or does it make you feel sated? Or, I don't know. It's just very different for different people. But by the time you have a career which is so demanding, I think it's helpful to know yourself to that point. It's like, just can I check off the basic things? Like, do I eat? How's my diet? How's my sleep? Did I go for a run? Things like that really, really set you up for, this is, it's a long career. We're not professional footballers here. It's a long career. It's demanding, and it's not a 9-to-5 job. So you need to know how to look after yourself. And those mini experiments can be quite useful and helpful. And once you understand how to set the parameters of an experiment like that, you can do bolder ones, like what work interests me? What am I good at? What is unfairly easy for me? What feels like I'm driving in first gear all the time? Those sorts of things require certain awareness that you get from small things.
Yeah. But when did you feel you first started applying that in that practice?
Last week?
No, but
no, honestly, systematically, like, writing it down, thinking about your perspective, probably like years, like super recent, which is almost embarrassing, I'd say. Whatever, it doesn't matter. People should profit from the people's mistake, I think, if they're not, causing them to have the mistake. I think it's important. I wish someone had told me, like, just take it easy. This is fine. You don't need to figure it all out. Just figure out, what did you have for breakfast and how did it make you feel? Start there. And I would have been too impatient and arrogant to be, I was like, I'm busy. Deal. Those things are not mutually exclusive if you think about it in that fashion. And that's something that I would say is like, focus on the small things because they're very powerful. You can get a good body of work on genetics from studying fruit flies. Like, that's mind-boggling to me. But also highly insightful on how insights are produced.
Nice. So going back, like, how did you get into the law? What was your route into a career in law?
Well, I grew up in Switzerland, and I'm francophone. I wanted to study. I'd worked already, so I was a bit older than the average student.
Right.
And I wanted to do something kind of intellectually interesting, rather than just grind out 3 years very quickly or 2 years or whatever it takes. And so I wanted to study. So I went to McGill in Montreal, where there's both common and civil law, and after programs in English, roughly. There's English and French components to it. That's what I wanted. I thought it would be interesting. I definitely didn't have the makeup or appetite for, a doctor or nurse or whatever. It didn't appeal to me. And this allowed, I like the sort of bookish vibe of sort of late adolescent. I thought it had kind of a it's cool to have a job where you can have a library in your office. Like, I like that.
Yeah.
Super sophisticated thinking, I suppose.
Yeah.
But the program itself was really cool, and it was fun studying it in Canada, in Quebec, because first of all, Montreal is like some town. Yeah. Whoever hasn't been, please go. It's but it's also interesting historically because it was French, and starting from European intervention, I'm not even mentioning the complexities of what happened before. Let's go down that road. But yeah, so it was French civil law, and then there was the small matter of the North American wars, and then the English imposed common law. It's cool because the way they teach it to you is the French populace, or the French-speaking populace, embraced their civil law so much that they would have secret hearings in barns and stuff, like using the outdated civil code. Like, that was their subversion and revolution. It was kind of cool. I'd love to see that. I love seeing things like that. And then you read cases where, Hunter A and Hunter B, and Hunter A shot a moose on his property, but by the time it died, it wandered over to Hunter B's property, and how property cases are decided one way under civil law, and then it gets decided and then appealed and sent to the Privy Council, and their philosophical reasoning is completely upside down because property law is conceived so differently. What's cool is on the weekend you can rent a car and drive to where Hunter A. I'm kind of, I guess I'm not thinking myself.
The next jurisdiction of it. How does it work for then? Like, so in Canada, like, if going to McGill, does that transfer to US, to going and working in the US? How easy?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does recruitment right on campus, which is what I did. And I think in the US, I mean, God bless the litigious nature of the US. Like, some English guy sued the New York State Bar Association for violating his, I don't know what right it was, but why should he not be allowed to be a member of the New York State Bar?
Okay.
And won, thereby opening the floodgates to people like me. All you got to do is rock up and write the bar exam. I mean, which is, I wouldn't say it's difficult.
It's good access. Yeah, the bar exam is no mean feat, I imagine. But I tried to study. I tried to do my my third year in uni. I did it overseas and ended up in Germany. McGill was there was a couple of exchange spots, and I didn't have the grades first year to get those. I mean, it was definitely popular, and I've visited Montreal since, but it just seems like a cool town to study. Really amazing university. So, awesome.
Cool. We'll move on to lesson 2.
On lesson 2, I think I had sent it to you. Explore it out, make sure that you're there. Bet on yourself. I mean, I think this is, again, something that lawyers are loath to do, right? I mean, you don't even want to read the annexes of the contract. Like, you stop at the end of the contract, you're like, all right, here are my comments. For this thing, 50 pages of commercial annexes, you got to roll up your sleeves and get into that, right? Like, you're literally taught, like, you stop where it says, whatever, signature. Yeah, exactly. And it's like wrong-headed to the nth degree. And also, I mean, just aside, it is a profession which demands specialization and excellence and attention to detail in a way that maybe other professions, maybe the medical industry also. But your career looks like a pyramid. You're becoming from a corporate generalist to section X point, Y point, Z lawyer. There's this sort of arc to that. And as a result of that and the pressures of that, feel like the chance of betting on yourself are few and far between, in my opinion, because there's not room for that kind of expression unless you're like the highest level practitioner, or you're sitting on a bench somewhere, like maybe that then judicially you can pronounce yourself and express yourself. But I don't think we're talking about that, or at least I'm not. And that's what I kind of liked about becoming an entrepreneur. First of all, I wanted to do a startup that had, as part of its product offering, a legal/regulatory piece to it. Like, I didn't want to be the lawyer at Uber. Part of maybe now that they've embraced the regulatory or sort of been thrust into their regulatory embrace. But yes, that was really my vision. And then having lived and worked in Kenya and traveled all over Africa, where I was the general counsel for a mobile money provider, including in West Africa. And there are 6 or 7 francophone assets at that point. And then there's also Anglophone Africa. I'd seen both the promise of that technology, but also the dysfunctions of the regulatory patchwork. There's a couple of tropes. One is Africa the country. There's 54 countries there. So each country is totally different in its infrastructure and regulatory, totally different. But there's enough differences that you cannot mindlessly just step from country A to B to C. And so I think that's it. And I think also Africa is not for amateurs. It's a place which demands that you understand the unit economics very, very closely. You cannot simply parachute in. And in my experience, that was with that sort of sober worldview, we undertook to get, licensed in Kenya and TZ and other places where it was a very, very powerful learning tool. Again, I bet on myself. Like, there was no manual on how to complete these applications, how to present the business case, how to present your controls. I mean, you could look to other precedents, but ultimately there's an element of dialogue, technocratic interchange with regulators, which I found very pleasing, both professionally, intellectually. Just you felt like you were part of something bigger than yourself.
I think the betting on yourself is a brilliant takeaway. Like with you can unpick like what got you, like the how do you find yourself in that position to have the opportunity to be founding a international payments provider? So step by step, like from McGill, so you went from McGill into big law or what was your
McGill into big law, and like a very broad-based, like corporate sort of experience. But my partner works for UNICEF. And so I like to joke that she has the grown-up job. And UNICEF is one of those agencies where you do need to relocate onto the field and then cycle back to headquarters and to keep, cross-pollinating learnings and ideas and governance. It's kind of a cool concept, demanding on the family. Not to mention, anyway, long story short, we were in New York. Me and Big Law, she had HQ, and then she got an offer to move to Nairobi, Kenya.
Okay.
And our daughter had just been born. She was 2 years old. And I figured, I just didn't feel plugged in to where I was. I mean, obviously, it's a very rigorous place, and I'm learning, and you're well compensated and all the rest of that. But I had sort of misgivings. I had restlessness. I'm easily bored. And I wanted something, a bigger version of myself. I couldn't define it. But I knew, and this was de-risked completely. My wife already had a job, a 2-year-old girl. So there's no loss of face. In fact, it made me look prestigious and cool. I'm just trying to be candid with you. Like, all those aspects go away. Like, I just try.
Because these things, they look planned from the outside, unless you have these conversations, or they look like this was in someone's roadmap. But it's stuff like that is gives the authenticity to it and the real story, and being able to describe the real story, I think is powerful. So thanks for being open on it. So that took you there. And then with the co-founders of your business, how were they in your sort of line of sight? How did you know each other?
Well, I'll give you some context before I answer that. Like, so Nairobi, so I ended up taking like a year off and then working, like I said, for a mobile wallet provider. And in Nairobi at that point, and still to some extent, feels like a frontier town, entrepreneurial energy. Like you imagine those saloon doors swinging, it's like the creative version of that. There's a lot of people coming. There's a lot of capital arriving, a lot of ideas, some terrible, some okay, some excellent. And so it's a real gathering place for, and it's also suburban Nairobi. If you're lucky and if you're, whatever privilege, that it does have sort of a feel very familiar on some level as well. So it's got a perfect mix of familiarity in terms of language, the law, the whatever, and also like strangeness, which I found really exhilarating. Having passed on a bunch of startup ideas, which I noodling with different people along the way, I finally screwed up the courage to do something like this because it spoke directly to my skill set, because I could trust the co-founders. I feel like there's a lot of emotional resonance there. Similar sort of value system, similar family oriented, like average age, like very high, et cetera, et cetera. You know what I mean? Like it's just like it sends a certain. You're not there to like roll the dice and then take big swings, and it was a very measured approach. Anyway, in answer to your question, how did I encounter them? I mean, organically, through work. And then we had friends in common, we had colleagues in common, and then we started thinking about this. And in fairness, the three other co-founders had done a fair bit of work on the tech side of things, but they were some way down the road on that. And then, but then we had a different direction.
Brilliant. Yeah, I think years gone by, maybe more than current climate of VC funding, but the people running something with something personally to lose versus the young startup where it's like, well, let's see if it works, is a bit of a different. I can see how there's a different mindset, and everyone's in it there with something to some.
Paradoxically, I would also say, like, I can see why it skews young. I mean, very demanding in terms of energy and the boundarylessness between what it just never stops when you're doing this, and that's good. That's demanding. That's as it should be. But I'm saying, and I would say this in the lessons learned. When you're de-risked from, like, I don't have a house and I've kids, just use that time to like run as many experiments as possible, because you have I was reading this thing about how a blog somebody put, I think it was a law firm, I forget which one, about how to negotiate. Founder should negotiate with the VC. And it's like, generally we're assuming that the founder is young and that the VC is old. So just make yourself the most polite nuisance possible. Like, call them at dinner time. I don't understand this deal term. What does liquidation preference mean? Like, just make, and they're like, I gotta have dinner with my kid. You gotta leverage that, but do it nicely and just like totally use their youth and energy against the capital and age.
Yeah.
I thought that was a really tactical insight into like, oh, interesting. That's true. I see myself more as the VC than the founder on that scenario, but in terms of age and demographic. But I thought but you don't hear enough stuff like.
No, that is good. Practical hustle, like how do you? Yeah, that's a word that's thrown around, but how to the little practical tips that people have done and have applied in their processes, then and enabled them to cut corners is good. That's really that is a yeah, really good one. I might apply that myself. I think you're right. Like with trying things early, and now with I've got like 3 kids and running. And the difference between I cared about my job when I had a job, but it is a completely different mindset. And there's unless I haven't been able to find it, there doesn't feel like an off switch. Like it's I still care about most of the stuff that goes on in our company, and it's very difficult to the boundaries. So having it with 3 young kids makes it like, God, I'm so glad I started this 10 years ago rather than now. I think it would be as like comes from complicated.
How old are your kids, Scott, if you don't mind asking?
They're 6 months, just about to turn 4 and just about to turn 7. So
congratulations.
Thank you. Full on. Yours
definitely use the bank to send your down payment money to.
I don't want to add limits.
No funny, no crypto involved, please. Just don't do it. With all due respect,
that is not a hassle. I need that.
Straight bet. No, mine are 16 and almost 13 and 9. So
nice.
And then funny because
how's that living in the US and schooling kids in the US and what have you?
It's good. I mean, we only moved here 3 years ago. We were living, like I said, in Kenya before that, and then Indonesia. Well, Indonesia and then Kenya. I mean, and then so been moving around a fair bit. So I think they kind of like it. They like the groundedness, the sort of quote unquote normalcy of it all, because they've lived overseas. Like 2 of my kids were born in Kenya, and lived there until like 3 or 4 or 5. Old enough to have sort of baseline expectation sets and memory sets and et cetera. And so, actually, I mean, it's opportunities for the kids and it's New York City, so it's a lot of stimulation for them.
And how did they adapt in moving the couple of moves you've made?
Again, better done when they're young. We had to literally promise our daughter we would not interrupt the unit. It was begrudging. I mean, we thought it was a win-win. Like high school is a unit, not just academic, but social time, right? I don't want to interrupt that. And so, I mean, I went to boarding school, so, but yeah, no. So it's good. Yeah. It's fun. It's funny. Like now we have on the back of our car, please be patient, new driver, because she'll be. So it's all very surreal. It's like I never thought this would happen to me. I thought this was for other people. I thought this is like, I had to attend a college night the other night. I mean, there's so many things that are happening that are kind of surreal if you don't capture them going fast, faster. They say that, well, as a dad of a 6-month-old, I mean, the days are long, but the years are short.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the most pithy way I've seen it. I've heard it expressed.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely, the third one's definitely different with it's our last one. So that's,
it says he with some finality.
It's our last one anyway, touch wood. And then, exactly that you're like, God, 7-year-old now feels like it was a boom when when she was that age. So you have to, as painful as it is sometimes, you have to be like right in the moment and actually enjoying the little things which won't stick around forever. So I wholeheartedly agree. And the nights are pretty long right now, but it doesn't last forever.
For what it's worth, you look well rested.
Okay, sometimes, but
sorry.
Cool. Well, with that, we'll jump to lesson 3.
Lesson 3 underpins all of this. just love versus fear. And there's really only two axes upon which I think decisions can be taken. If you zoom out enough and look at it, with enough dispassion and distance, you're picking one versus the other ultimately. If you told me this 15 years ago or 20 years ago, I mean, like, I gotta go, man. I don't have time for it. But now I really think it is something that it's honestly, and I'm saying it because for me to say these words, knowing that it's being recorded, would be something, again, astonishing to me 15 years ago. To be like, that is excruciating. That makes me curl my toes so hard that I'm getting a cramp instead. But I truly believe, I think it's important to say it out loud. And again, but if you've done the work of the fruit flies or the mini experiments, it won't seem that abstract. Because I said, I don't like the big words and they're hard, they're unattainable. These are huge words, right? I mean, they're like $5 words. They're out there. We don't know what they mean. They mean different things to you and me. But if you've done the work of the knowing yourself and sketching out those little experiments, they won't seem that big. That's why it's the third rule, not the second rule, or the first rule. Because if I put it first, it would just, this guy is so hokey, But it is actually quite actionable.
Yeah.
And it does. If you literally catalog your decisions, a lot of it will be like, it would be cool to do this. It'd be cool. Love. Let's have a third kid. That's love. There's a lot of fear involved with having a third kid.
Yeah.
You could easily, there's a million reasons. There's climate change would boil the oceans. You'll never have a job. Robots are going to be, not to mention your own household dynamics, but it's so easy to do all that. But instead you're like, now we're doing it because we think having a cozy, chaotic household is full of love. And then we want that. And you're doing it. Everyone's doing it, but we don't have the self-knowledge.
Cool. So this will be a seamless link. I've noticed a different background. I had to switch rooms where I was recording. Yeah, won't say any more than that. But so sorry I interrupted the flow. But love versus fear and decisions being made on that axis. What's the biggest? Where do you lean towards the most? Like, and where do you think you have when it's been decisions about your career?
Oh, you mean my default?
Yeah.
I default to fear all day long,
Yeah.
Yeah, I default to fear. I feel like I should be taking way bigger punts. And if I look back in hindsight, all the, moving to Kenya to support public narrative was to support my partner, but also it was a cool adventure. And I was hanging out with my daughter as a baby. Like, who doesn't love that? But yeah, I feel like that was a big love-driven decision. I didn't know it. I didn't have this language. And as I said, if someone told me about this language, I would have sneered at them at that time. Yeah, it opens the door to all sorts of things. I mean, you know this as a founder. So you got to just do those three things. Learn yourself, bet on yourself, and then try to do things and treat your colleagues and friends and teammates with as much care and love as possible. And cool things will happen. Maybe in a time scale that you think is appropriate, or maybe you're more patient. I'm a very impatient, easily bored person. And therefore try to impose KPIs and metrics on things which are not susceptible to that kind of analysis. And that leads to a lot of person suffering because I feel like, wow, and it's like a lot of things don't work like that, but you have to come to terms with that. So I think the legal training, legal training doesn't really necessarily help because it has to all be quite linear in my head. It has to be like, we can't be taking 2 steps back, then 3 steps forward. But in my head, that's like really inefficient, but that's a lot of life works.
Yeah. So on the flip side of that, what's the biggest superpower that being legally trained gives you as a entrepreneur or a founder of a business?
Well, with some seasoning, and once I got over the whole parade of horribles everywhere, like that's what you're trained to do. Like, this could fail, it could break. It does ground you. You have good reflexes, good judgment generally. And you are trained, hopefully, to be a listener and to synthesize information. I feel like good lawyers have that. I don't care if you're a criminal lawyer or if you're a constitutional lawyer. It doesn't matter. Like, I feel like good lawyers or good people generally are able to listen and then synthesize and put an and rather than a but at the end of whatever the thought process is. I think and the act of writing, I think, is so important. And I think we're one of the few professions where a lot of time is still spent on, you must be able to write effectively. And to write effectively, you must be able to collate and organize your thoughts effectively. And to do that, you have to listen effectively, et cetera. But I feel like the writing, even if it's a memo that will never leave your desk drawer, the act of writing it creates so much lucidity. And that is a superpower, I think.
Yeah.
It truly is. And I feel like I know a couple of other lawyers who are, entrepreneurs, and it translates into all sorts of things, governance, for one, is huge. We have on our cap table the World Bank, we've got large public corporations, and we try to learn from them and emulate them in our governance structures and techniques. And that's the other thing, is it makes you, once you're doing the love versus fear and the other things, and you're betting on yourself, the existential threat that someone else's opinion poses to you sort of fades away.
Mm-hmm.
It goes from 9 in volume down to like 1 or 2 or something. It's another data point. I get it. Nice point. Let me think about if I can incorporate it. I thought about it. I can't incorporate it, but I'm going to go with this way. But I hear what you said. Like, that's a very skillful way to approach the world. I feel like I'm falsely advertising that I've got it all figured out. I definitely don't. Definitely. But there's a lot of that flows into this. I'm able to identify also second, third, fourth order consequences, which may be invisible to someone who's trained as, say, an engineer or a scientist.
Yeah.
Because they want to solve the problem, but the patient's going to die, So yes, your surgery is technically successful. The patient's dead. A good point. I'm like, is it a good point? Because this seems totally logical to me from where I'm standing.
Yeah.
That's what I would say.
No, yeah, it's really well. I think it's really well put. The different angles, and I think what you said was makes a good lawyer, and then that actually makes good people. And I think that's where lawyers tend to not bet on themselves. Back to your second lesson, is that they are very early on putting themselves and are put into a pigeonhole that is then confined to being a lawyer. Mindset, it drives how they're perceived, limitations, putting self-limitations on. So yeah, I guess it's one of those professions where you are like is vocational in at university, right? Most people, not all, but in the UK, where there's an undergrad element to law, it doesn't always lead to becoming a lawyer, but I don't know what the stats are, 65, 70%. It becomes true. There's not that many doctors and vets and dentists and things are similar, but I don't think all paths lead to that. So it can be limiting. So yeah, good to hear how you've burst out of that. And what would you say to anyone that's like a lawyer that's thinking like maybe not as drastic a decision to set something up or go down an entrepreneurial route, but taking a real shift in their career? What would be your big thing to consider? Not to give you too lawyerly an answer, but I'd cross-reference back to my 3 lessons, which is just this section about, which is to say, like, no, don't do it if it's sudden or it's like a big swing and you think you're going to hit a home run. I think you haven't done the fruit flies thing, because it should feel incremental. It should feel like almost inevitable if you're doing the homework, if you're doing the self-knowledge of like who you are and where you are in the risk appetite, and trying to abandon those labels that you just described, which is like you're whatever, employee benefits lawyer, and you can only look at these sections and just understand what this is going to do in the deal. Yeah, it's going to be hard to jump from that to doing this unless you've done some sort of, not that I have anything against, there's no right or wrong, by the way, to be clear. It's just my own personal restlessness which informs this answer. So I'd say, like, just start small, make it incremental. There's many, many small ways to do this. You don't need to go to Silicon Valley and then, it's like, I just don't believe that. It's like the equivalent of the only way to find enlightenment is to go sit on a, shala somewhere in Himalaya. Like, I don't know. It just seems hokey to me. You should be able to do it when your baby's taking a nap. Like, that should be like a little moment where the person sleeping on your chest is like an awesome feeling. Like, that's it. You don't need to get on a plane to experience that. And same thing here. It shouldn't feel so like, here I go. Yeah. I'm jumping out of the plane now. Maybe. But for me, it doesn't work that way. And for most lawyers, I'd say I'm a very average person of average intelligence, average taste. And I think that's good to be self-aware about that. But that also makes you understand, things that are outliers as well. Yeah. Cool. Well, I've been asking everyone as a sort of wrap up their go-to podcasts and book suggestions to share with our audience. If we can start with your podcast you think people, or you think was worth checking out.
From a profession perspective, I like the Scott Galloway, the Professor G podcasts, in as much as they are good explainer. And I find myself a little bit more informed, although I may not agree with everything, at least an interesting working theory on, why is the world of AI so incestuous? Like, for example, that's a good question. Why is the FTC not interested in like how every board of directors sort of overlaps with other board in such a critical technology? Talking about things like speak to me in a way that I can see clearly, it helps me. I mean, there is an aftertaste of broishness, which I don't necessarily subscribe to, but that's okay. That's fine. That's the message or whatever, And so, so it's not that I embrace it or I'm endorsing it. I just feel like it explains things lucidly when I'm walking the dog. Great value to me. It's entertaining. He's a funny guy and he's got good turn of phrase. I learned something along the way. It doesn't require a lot of, cerebral engagement as well. I do like that.
And your book recommendation.
Yeah, my most gifted book is It's High Output Management by Andy Grove.
Okay.
That's what it's called. I was looking for it on my bookshelf, but I'd given my last copy away.
Okay.
And it's so important. I feel like it's so tactical. It's so practical. And you don't need to be running a semiconductor industry business and sort of embrace the lessons of it. I mean, why is the semiconductor stuff interesting? Because the margin of error is so small.
Mm-hmm.
So it's be consoling to someone like me, right? When you're sending trillions of dollars across borders, like what is your margin of error for like something going wrong? It's like, I'm also, I wouldn't be so arrogant as to compare it to like a semiconductor, because they're like, 2 microns and an entire $250 million batch is unusable.
Yeah.
And so there's a huge emphasis on systems and systems thinking and how to conduct a meeting and how to write a peer review and how to, basically you as a business owner or a function owner or a team leader or your deliverable is the output of the team that you're leading. And that's the baseline teaching of the book.
Yeah.
It's like, look at it that way.
Yeah.
Like look at your whole org and look at what it's producing and then think about inefficiencies and efficiencies, optimizations and the secret sauce of trust, like how trust is the ultimate accelerant. You and I trust each other. Like that's the most human connection ever.
Yes.
Not to be transactionalized. It's not to be monetized. And it turns everything up. And to do that, you have to tune into the systems and then have fidelity to the systems. The value of I already quoted paraphrased the book once already in this session, which is the value of writing things and having your team write things. There's no obfuscation. Mm-hmm. With a PowerPoint, I could misdirect all sorts of ways and say, I don't know in 100 different ways. In writing, it's very difficult. A good crisp writing, that I would like to read.
Nice. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing those and your lessons, which are, I think, collectively very strong as well as individually, but as a collective, they flow very well into each other. So, thanks for the thought that you put into those as well. Great chatting and getting to know a bit more about your background. Thank you.
No, thank you, Scott. This is a really cool program, and I like that it's sort of humanizing, and it's in an industry where we're required to be very buttoned up and sort of measured. It needs to have a forum where you can not abandon those things, but build on those things to add and sort of a nuance of authenticity, I suppose, is the word that I would use.
Right place, right time. There's always a time for being buttoned up and professional, and at the right time, we all can all do that. But I think, the last 4 or 5 years has certainly humanized things in a working context as well, and it's super important to be able to showcase that as well. So glad it's on point. Tries to continue to be so, but appreciate the feedback. Thank you for your time. Have an amazing Thanksgiving with the family and friends and yeah.
Thanks a lot, Scott, and keep up the great work. And again, appreciate you having me. Cheers.
Hi, thanks for listening to today's show of Lessons I Learned in Law, the podcast powered by Heriot Brown. I really hope you got some value from it. It's the real reason that I set up the podcast to help you, our audience of in-house lawyers or people within the legal profession, to learn from others in the industry. At Heriot Brown, we're a legal recruitment business that is driven by a mission to help lawyers find fulfillment in their careers. For us, this extends well beyond the transactional aspect of helping you find a new job or finding hires for your legal team. Where we excel is bringing the best people together and the right people together, which is why community has always been at the heart of our business. We really try to add real value to our network. So to keep up to date with everything going on in our community, make sure you subscribe to Lessons I Learned in Law on your favourite podcast platform. And if you've enjoyed this episode, leave us a review or share it with your friends and colleagues on social media. That would be much appreciated. Take care.